Soil Farmer of the Year 2018, I would like to leave.
Okay, so is the sound working at the back? Can you hear me okay? Yeah, a bit better. Right, thank you very much for having me. Hope I can show you a few interesting things that I've been doing. I'm just going to start off talking a little about economics of no-till. People always ask me, oh, you must be saving masses of money on diesel and different things. I never really work anything out about financial things because I just basically, this is my philosophy, and I just think look after the soil and the money will take care of itself. And that's a conscious decision because I don't want to be influenced by spreadsheets and margins of different crops and trying to work out the pros and cons of different things. I just do what I think is the best thing for the soil and getting the best crops. And the money just does look after itself. An example of doing that is that I don't have any fixed rotation. I just think about every field individually, and throughout the year I'll work out what's going to be the best crop to grow on that field next year. And it can be anything. I have a whole range of different crops I can grow, and I just have this cropping plan, just a spreadsheet, and whenever I go around the farm when I'm working, I'm always thinking, what shall I do? And then I'll come back and put it in here, and I just change it, and this evolves over a period of time. Right up to the day I'm going to drill, I might change something. You know, if you're going to drill some winter beans and it's a bit wet and mucky, well, I won't bother with that, so I'll scrub that and move on to something else. But it just sounds a bit crazy, but the point is, pretty well all crops, there is a margin in them to grow them because that just market forces mean that there's a profit. The inputs, the price of the inputs are geared to what a crop would produce. But the main thing is a good crop will always pay better than a bad crop, whatever the sort of budgeted margin it may be. You want to grow the good crops, and that's most important. About the last time I grew rape was probably the beginning of here somewhere, up there. Sort of swapping linseed for rape. A really good crop of linseed will pay better than a poor, rubbishy crop of rape. And so it doesn't matter what you grow, but you've got to do a good job at it. And there's no set rules. I've changed things. I'm quite happy to grow a second wheat if I think there isn't much black grass and it's in the soil's in good condition and I'm managing the straw in the right way. It doesn't. All sorts of things affect this. Now, back in 2012, we had a really wet autumn. Managed to get some wheat in, some put in, and it was just too wet to do it really, and it was ended up with a lot of spring crops. And it just dawned on me that was quite a high-risk strategy, being dependent on drilling the whole farm with annual crops every year. And I thought, surely, if I could have some perennial crops that don't need to be drilled every year, that would be another way of spreading the risk and getting more diversity and just making life simpler, really. So I came up with two things to grow. Lucerne, which I grow for 3 years for Dengie crop dryers, and I started growing herbage seed, grass seed. So the grass and the lucerne, that's in for 3 years, the grass is in for 2 years, 2 harvests, but I undersowed that in spring barley the year before. So it's in the ground for 2.5 years. And that's that's been a revolution really for my farm, having these crops just in the ground, very low inputs, low impact on the soil biology. It just gives the soil a chance to recover. Very little money tied up in those crops, and they're profitable, and they give me a decent return. And of course, when you come out of those, the soil's completely transformed. And they're my excuse for not bothering with cover crops, really, because I think they do a much better job. The other thing that what farmers don't realise how much money they've got tied up in growing of crops. Buying your seed, doing your drilling, and if you're doing cultivations, and it builds up and up, and it's sort of 18 months before you get your money back. You're investing in the next crop before you've even got your money from the previous one. But by going down this route, there's a lot of capital that you're releasing that was normally tied up in crop, because you're cutting your inputs, you're not doing all that cultivation work, that's all the money that's tied up in the machinery and the labour and the huge amount. So when you start down this route, for me, I suddenly sort of had quite a bit of money on my hands that I wasn't needing to invest in the crops. It built up over years, but from my own farm, I'd bought several bits of land over the years, and ended up having, big loans with the bank. We had to borrow all the money, and I was running an overdraft, which never seemed to quite clear throughout the year. But without me, I wasn't making any more money, but I had more capital available, and I was able to, the overdraft just disappeared, and then I started being in surplus in the bank, and then I thought, I've got money, I'll just pay it off the loans. And within a few short years, I became sort of not indebted to anybody, really. I didn't have any machinery on hire or lease things or anything. And in my mind, I hate borrowing money, and that just completely changed my attitude to how I was going to farm, because I could take risks. Just try things. If it goes wrong, it didn't matter. I wasn't beholden to anybody else, answerable to anybody. It was up to me. If I make a loss, well, so what? It doesn't matter. So I could be so much more braver in trying out different things. I think when farmers are really under the high rents or, big borrowings, they haven't got the freedom to do anything else. They're so constrained. And I really think a lot of farmers that have got bigger and bigger by taking on farm business tenancies and, getting more land to spread the sort of economies of scale, and then they need bigger machinery to cope with it. Really, they should have a look at that and just think, get rid of it all, pay off everything, and just concentrate on your farm where you're going to make the most money, and give yourself some time to think. And then you start to look at the whole farming system differently. And that's been the best thing for me. Right, now we'll talk about proper farming. Right, this is, we make a bit of hay for our horses and things, but my mind always comes back to this now. This is the proof of biological systems and what drives me to keep working on it. We've got these little bits of grass, marshes and things around the farm. When we had dairy cows, cows used to graze these. Every time we graze them, we chuck a bit more nitrogen on to get the grass to grow. Because, that's what you do to get grass to grow, you put nitrogen on it. After the cows went, I just started making bits of hay for our horses and a few liveries and things. But we used to get a lot of hay, all thick green stuff, difficult to make. And one day I thought, I actually don't need all this hay. Half as much should be enough for what we need. So I stopped putting nitrogen on there. And I thought, well, we'll just take what we get. Obviously, the next year we didn't get much hay. But over a few years, probably 6 or 7 years, the yield of the hay started to go up again. And now we're pretty well nearly to what I used to get by putting nitrogen on there. And that to me is the proof that you really don't need to do anything. So that soil, this land it was under the sea 200 years ago, so it's built a bit of topsoil. It's never ever been limed. It's never had any P or K ever in its life. It hasn't, since the cows went, it has had no muck, no compost, never been limed, absolutely nothing. There's no legumes in there. It's making its own nitrogen to produce that. And if you weighed that, you wouldn't be far off the dry matter biomass of a wheat crop. So why can't we get that system to work on our arable fields? Maybe we can't quite get there because that's a perennial, permanent thing, and we're growing annual crops, which has got a break, and roots live and die. But, you know, that's what I want to do, is get that to work. This is the soil under that grass, and you can see it's beautiful, crumbly. It never gets particularly wet. It's always moist, beautiful soil. And this is a hole I dug. It's not a very good picture, but there's about 6 inches of topsoil there over this original clay, and that's I suppose 200 years worth of soil building. It seems to have made that topsoil, and that's cycling nutrients, providing, it's fixing nitrogen out of the air, and doing everything it needs to do to produce that grass. Compare that to my arable fields originally, 15 years ago. Those fields have been arable on and off for, you know, hundreds of years. Sometimes there were grass for long periods, and then they go back into arable and backwards and forwards. But I got to the point where there's no topsoil left in there. That's just clay, the clay right to the top. And this is why I went to no-till, because that got nearly impossible to make into a seed bed, that stuff. It's just clay. You know, it's always either too wet or too dry. You can't grind it down, it's too hard. When it gets wet, it just all goes to muck. And so I knew that if I left it alone and drilled into it, I was going to get it on a lot better. I just got fed up with fields with poor plant, thin stands, areas with nothing growing at all, and it was hopeless. But now, with direct drilling, I put seed in the ground and the whole lot grows, and it all comes up the same day, perfect. And that's just a complete no-brainer to me. I would never do any sign of a cultivation again, ever. Now this is 12 years later, and you can see that in my arable field, this has grown about 4 inches of topsoil here, maybe a bit more, over the top of the clay, pure clay underneath. But this is what I've managed to make. I'm absolutely amazed at how this has done this, compared to that, which has taken 200 years to do that. Not only is this organic matter built up in this top layer, there's organic matter all down here in this clay, right down below. This is all porous, good soil structure that the whole lot can breathe right down here. This is all alive now, the whole lot. But I've been trying to work out, well, how has this done this so quickly? I don't know, but I do wonder whether that system has evolved, and that's all that depth of topsoil is all that needs to grow that grass. So there's no point going any deeper. That's cycling nutrients, providing everything it needs. It's on the interface here. The biology is working on the clay to dissolve, solubilize all the nutrients it needs back into the organic system here and up into the grass. So whether this is going to carry on growing or what's going to happen, I don't know. But you know, we're getting there as far as growing something for nothing, like the grass does. If you're into this, you really should know about ecological succession now. It's just, I'll quickly explain how virgin soil grows lichens and bits of things, and then it gradually evolves over many years until you end up with a forest at the end, and that's just natural succession. And if you leave soil alone, that's what happens. And we try to keep it where it's best for our crops. And I mean, you all see it all the time. It's why we have hedge cutters, because we want to try and stop the succession getting any further before the hedges and trees come in and your fields start getting smaller and smaller if you don't control it. But that's how it works. Underground, the same thing happens. This is much more complicated, and Audrey was talking about it, but to get it in your head and how to understand in a simple way what's going on, down here where these simple plants grow, it's all bacteria, and that's the conditions they like. Up here in these forests, it's all fungi in the soil, very little bacteria there, and so that's the succession that you've got to think about. Works in conjunction with the plants above, and they work together, and the trees will try and keep it fungal, and the fungi will, if you had fungal soil, trees would be the only thing that would grow. Black grass wouldn't grow in this, would hate it. So what you need, the idea is that nature is continually going this way, but just about everything we do in farming is pushing it the other way. All the cultivations, fertilisers, all the chemicals we put on, fungicides, insecticides, are all messing up this soil life down here. And that's, you know, always in the forefront of my mind, what effect is this doing that I'm having? And so I want a system that reduces the negative effects and just allows nature to push it back up that way all the time. Right, if we zoom in, it sort of recognise that these higher plants, our legumes and grasses, you want about a 50-50 bacteria to nitrogen ratio. That's perfect for those plants to grow. That's how they get their nutrients and working in that system. And cereals, wheat, barley, oats, generally a bit more bacterial. They thought they don't like it quite so much fungi, but I actually I think I've got proof to say that's wrong. Actually, they like it up here as well. Rape doesn't rely on mycorrhizal fungi. It doesn't need the fungi to work as well, and it's further down backwards down there, down with the weeds. Weeds need soluble nutrients to grow. They can't work in conjunction with the fungi up here. That's how they work. And obviously blackgrass, that's where blackgrass likes it as well. I mean, I said it's quite complicated, but you've got to think about aerobic and anaerobic bacteria as another dimension to this. So if you've got wet, waterlogged soil, the anaerobic bacteria are going to breed and grow, and that's going to be, the whole thing's going to be different to if it was an aerated, light breathing soil where it'll all be anaerobic. So where you've got blackgrass, this is the cause of it really, because your soil and your soil life is down at this other end here, not up here. And to me, ultimately the cure for blackgrass is to make the soil unsuitable for blackgrass to grow in. There's 2 fields here. They were drilled this year. This is my neighbour's field over the road, and I keep looking over the hedge and seeing what he's up to. And this is mine. They were drilled the same day. I think this has been subsoiled about 3 times in the last 2 years, crop failures, things, or it was too wet, then he drilled loose and it was too dry, it didn't grow, subsoil it again, bash it down. Anyway, it ended up a really fine, nice seed bed, put his wheat in, and it's all grown really well. This is my field. I'm hopefully I've got the fungi and everything working there. It's breathing, it's aerobic. You know, it walks dry all the time. Whereas this field, I mean, you can see we haven't had any rain this autumn, but already he's run in there and it's just all wet. The fine seed bed that he made has just sucked up the water and held onto it, and it's just gone anaerobic. And you can see the colour of the wheat. I don't know what's happened to that. The wheat is not enjoying that. Its roots are sitting in wet soil now, whereas this is green and quite happy, my wheat. Now, I mean, I've had fields go like this, when the drainage goes a bit wrong. I'm a bit late getting back with my moulling and things don't go very well, and you end up, it all gets a bit wet and perhaps rain will just wash the surface together. But I mean, I've been doing this sort of 15 years and it seems quite obvious to me, when this goes anaerobic, you will get blackgrass. And it may not be in that crop. I've seen it come in the next crop. Quite several times, you think you've got a clean crop and then blackgrass all appears again. And it's because the soil biology has been set up for the blackgrass. I've had other fields where there's been quite a lot, everything goes right, and it all disappears. The seeds are still there, but they don't grow, they don't even bother to germinate if the conditions are not right for them. You get a few plants come and they go up, spindly little plants, one ear on there. Quite often, just try things. If it goes wrong, it didn't matter. I wasn't beholden to anybody else, answerable to anybody. It was up to me. If I make a loss, well, so what? It doesn't matter. So I could be so much more braver in trying out different things. I think when farmers are really under the high rents or, you know, big borrowings, they haven't got the freedom to do anything else. They're so constrained. And I really think a lot of farmers that have got bigger and bigger by taking on farm business tenancies and, you know, getting more land to spread the sort of economies of scale, and then they need bigger machinery to cope with it. Really, they should have a look at that and just think, get rid of it all, pay off everything and just concentrate on your farm where you're going to make the most money, and give yourself some time to think. And then you start to look at the whole farming system differently. And that's been the best thing for me. Right, now we'll talk about proper farming. Right, this is, we make a bit of hay for our horses and things, but my mind always comes back to this now. This is the proof of biological systems and what drives me to keep working on it. We've got these little bits of grass, marshes and things around the farm. When we had dairy cows, cows used to graze these. Every time we graze them, we chuck a bit more nitrogen on to get the grass to grow. Because, I mean, that's what you do to get grass to grow, you put nitrogen on it. After the cows went, I just started making bits of hay for our horses and a few liveries and things. But we used to get a lot of hay, all thick green stuff, difficult to make. And one day I thought, I actually don't need all this hay. Half as much should be enough for what we need. So I stopped putting nitrogen on there. And I thought, well, we'll just take what we get. Obviously, the next year we didn't get much hay, but over a few years, probably 6 or 7 years, the yield of the hay started to go up again. And now, we're pretty well nearly to what I used to get by putting nitrogen on there. And that to me is the proof that you really don't need to do anything. So that soil, this land it was under the sea 200 years ago, so it's built a bit of topsoil. It's never ever been limed. It's never had any P or K ever in its life. It hasn't, since the cows went, it has had no muck, no compost, never been limed, absolutely nothing. There's no legumes in there. It's making its own nitrogen to produce that. And if you weighed that, you wouldn't be far off the dry matter biomass of a wheat crop. So why can't we get that system to work on our arable fields? Maybe we can't quite get there because that's a perennial, permanent thing, and we're growing annual crops, which has got a break and roots live and die. But, you know, that's what I want to do, is get that to work. This is the soil under that grass, and you can see it's beautiful, crumbly. It never gets particularly wet. It's always moist, beautiful soil. And this is a hole I dug. It's not a very good picture, but there's about 6 inches of topsoil there over this original clay, and that's I suppose 200 years worth of soil building. It seems to have made that topsoil, and that's cycling nutrients, providing, it's fixing nitrogen out of the air, and doing everything it needs to do to produce that grass. Compare that to my arable fields. Originally, 15 years ago, those fields have been arable on and off for, you know, hundreds of years. Sometimes there were grass for long periods, and then they go back into arable and backwards and forwards. But I got to the point where there's no topsoil left in there. That's just clay, the clay right to the top. And this is why I went to no-till, because that got nearly impossible to make into a seed bed, that stuff. It's just clay. You know, it's always either too wet or too dry. You can't grind it down, it's too hard. When it gets wet, it just all goes to muck. And so I knew that if I left it alone and drilled into it, I was going to get on a lot better. I just got fed up with fields with poor plant, thin stands, areas with nothing growing at all, and it was hopeless. But now, with direct drilling, I put seed in the ground and the whole lot grows, and it all comes up the same day, perfect. And that's just a complete no-brainer to me. I would never do any sign of a cultivation again, ever. Now this is 12 years later, and you can see that in my arable field, this has grown about 4 inches of topsoil here, maybe a bit more, over the top of the clay, pure clay underneath. But this is what I've managed to make. I'm absolutely amazed at how this has done this, compared to that, which has taken 200 years to do that. Not only is this organic matter built up in this top layer, there's organic matter all down here in this clay, right down below. This is all porous, good soil structure that the air the whole lot can breathe right down here. This is all alive now, the whole lot. But I've been trying to work out, well, how has this done this so quickly? I don't know, but I do wonder whether that system has evolved, and that's all that depth of topsoil is all that needs to grow that grass. So there's no point going any deeper. That's cycling nutrients, providing everything it needs. It's on the interface here. The biology is working on the clay to dissolve, solubilise all the nutrients it needs back into the organic system here and up into the grass. So the herbicides will just take them out easy as pie, but they won't kill blackgrass in there because the blackgrass is dominant. It's just absolutely loving it. I don't know what's happened to that photo because I was going to show you a tram line, but they're the same fields, just the colour of the green really. So this is just my thoughts about blackgrass. I don't think you'll ever win by trying to get rid of every blackgrass seed on your farm. You'd never ever get there. No matter how much hand roguing and doing, there'll always be some that survive and come in, and the only way we'll ever beat it is to get the soil conditions where it doesn't want to grow. So when you've got anaerobic soil, the backgrass is going to be dominant over the wheat. It's going to knock the yield, the wheat's not going to do as well. And it loves this. The way it works is that when it's anaerobic, the bacteria are working on the nutrients on and making them soluble. And that's how weeds have to take their nutrients in, just taking up out of the water. And if there's high nitrogen in the soil, that's all towards the weeds. If you get away from that, it's not going to like it. And the other thing, we all know this, if you leave blackgrass over winter, like a thick mat of blackgrass, when you come in the spring, it's all wet and slimy and nasty underneath. And you've got a difficult job to make a seed bed in that. But that's the bacteria and the blackgrass working together to keep the soil in that condition, which is how it likes it. So it's a two-way thing. The blackgrass is working with the bacteria and the other way. So obviously the only way you'll ever get the soil right is to keep it aerobic at all times throughout the year. No matter how much rain you get, the water's got to go through. There's got to be high quantities of fresh air in the soil, and that way we're going to win. We'll win and beat it. I put here. I haven't. We gave up using Atlantis and those sort of things 20 years ago. We just got resistant to it. But now I'm finding with the blackgrass struggling in conditions it doesn't like, those herbicides are working now. I mean, it may be that the resistance has grown away, I don't know, but it just seems so much easier to kill. Right. When I've got those photos, I'll just talk about my tram lines, or lack of tram lines. The other photograph showed it better, but it didn't come out. Throughout the winter, I always run in a different place. I don't drill tram lines, drill in a different place, spray in a different place every time. I just move over 6 metres and go again. You have to drill the outside, spray the outside tram line, obviously you've got to stick to that. But even turning on the ends, I never turn and run along the tram line and back up, because that means that will be run on twice. And it's not going to recover quite so easily as if you've only run on it once. So if there's no hedge or ding, I'll just run on past the tram line and turn. If there's a hedge, I'll turn in really sharp and miss it. But just never run in the same place each time. Then when you come back for your next spray, there's no sign of where you've been. And so you go in another place, and it just works brilliantly. And then you can just about see those wheel marks. I've got now, spray the field, and you finish up in the furthest corner. Don't come trucking all the way around the tram line and coming out, running on it again. I just fold up and set off across the middle. Why not? That's how you treat a grass field. If you went to spray a grass field, you just drive up, you go, don't you? Pick the driest way and away you go. So that was a week after I'd sprayed. I went back 3 weeks after, and you can't see the wheel marks, all gone, because it's alive. It just comes back up, and it's just such a much better system. You can go in wet conditions long before tram lines that have been run down and water standing in, and just really good. way of operating, I find. Right. Trying to allow it to go forwards all the time. You don't actually have to, if you didn't do anything, nature would do it on its own. So the whole point is lessening the impact of what we do so that it's got a chance to keep up. So obviously, number one, do not cultivate your soil. It's just the most ridiculous thing to do. People accuse us of no-tillers of being a bit of a religion, and we're fanatical. And well, I'm sorry, it is a religion, and you do have to believe in it, and it works. No question in that. Total believer. Gone. Right. Changing the crops you grow. When we were growing wheat rape like everybody else, massive amount of nitrogen going into those crops. But just by moving into spring crops, putting legumes in, different things, that halved the nitrogen that I was going onto my farm immediately. So that's halving the impact of nitrogen that affects and is disrupting the soil biology. That's an easy thing to do. Don't worry about what gross margins things do. Just get on with it and allow it to work. I've done no P or K or anything 20 years. Not bothered about that. It's just crops grow like the grass grows. You know, it does. Try and put some carbon in with. I use liquid nitrogen. Put some carbon in with that. That you just feel that's going to help. So that as the nitrogen's broken down, it's not using up my organic matter and things to balance the ratio. And then just generally reducing chemicals wherever I think we can get away with it. And if you really do believe, like I say, you'll take a chance with not using a fungicide or not doing a seed dressing, because you just think, yeah, I think it'll manage without, and do it. So don't use any seed dressings, and you can buy seed, bought-in seed when you need to, with no dressing on. I just sign Agri do the seed, sign a bit of paper to say I'll take responsibility for anything going wrong, and they're quite happy. Save the money, save the damage of the fungicide. It's easy. You cut down the fungicides now. So as a policy, I don't do a T0 fungicide. No downside to that. Don't usually end up on a dry part of the world. Don't bother with a T3 fungicide. If it was a really wet time, I might have to, but it's no problem. Trying to cut out insecticides. Some people have stopped completely, but I have had some really bad experiences with BYDV, and I can't seem to get away from that at the moment. And I don't understand enough about aphids and why they come, and whenever I've tried not doing it, it seems to be the worst year ever to experiment, and it's devastating. So that's something I haven't cracked yet. Obviously, putting these perennial crops into the system, massive less impact on the soil biology. Lucerne, once you establish it, use a herbicide just to get it going, and then one herbicide in the winter between crops. You know, it's virtually nothing going into that soil for 3 years. It's like a soil, giving it a holiday. And the succession is just going to go flying up. All those roots, all that life going on in the soil, uninterrupted. The grass seed is another pretty good one. I still have to put nitrogen on there, but there's nothing else. You see, nature can cope with little bits to knock it down, and it will come back again. So they're, brilliant. They're what are called low input crops. That's what I want, is low input crops. Not only are they saving money, less capital involved in in growing the things, less risk, but it's better for the soil as well. And then I make my own compost, and I use that as an inoculation just to help things along. I could go on all day about that, but you need to read the Direct Driller magazine if you want to know about compost. It's all written in there. So that's just the way I'm working, really. Right. Mycorrhizae. Now I've been sending off root samples for quite a few years now, just for interest and to see what's going on. And they wash the roots, dye the mycorrhizae with blue stain, and then count them, and they come up with a figure for a percent of the root surface colonised by mycorrhizae. Usually we were getting good mycorrhizae for cereals was considered about 30% colonisation, and the higher legumes and the grasses would be a fair bit higher than that. But this is a microscope slide of a lucerne plant 3 weeks after it came up, and there's 90% colonisation on that lucerne straight away, which is pretty amazing that was in the soil there. Must have been masses of spores and hyphae there, ready to go onto that lucerne. And I've just put the previous cropping of that field here. So that picture was from 2017, when it was just coming up in the spring. Now this is quite a black grassy field, and I've sort of avoided wheat. Done several spring crops in a row, and that was just what happened to be at the time what I've grown. No cover crops between any of these spring crops, before any of these, nothing. It's just bare stubble job. And yet the mycorrhizae had built up to that level in the soil. It sort of goes against these ideas of keeping live roots in the soil all year round, and everything you've got to do to try and build your soil health. I think it's just not cultivating, really, that is the answer to everything. Leave it alone. I'm not really a biology teacher or anything, but just to get your head around the idea what's happening with mycorrhizae. In a normal system, no fungi in the soil. The plant roots, just for their nutrients, purely rely on the nutrients that are soluble in the water. So they draw in water, all the nutrients come with it in solution. And the whole system of soil indices is just trying to juggle and get the balance of nutrients right as they come in with the water. Where a plant with masses of mycorrhizae is on a completely different system of nutrition. The whole surface, the whole area of the soil is working. All these mycorrhizae are working with bacteria to break down nutrients and bring them back to the plant, to the root, everything it needs. The root's signalling what it needs to get the mycorrhizae to work, and it's just a really complex system providing perfectly balanced nutrients to the plant. This is just a pretty haphazard way of sucking up water that's got what you hope is everything in it. And so if this is all balanced, you're going to get a healthy plant. Just written this up again. So this is the soluble side here, water and soluble nutrients. Mycorrhizae can do so much more. All these things, I mean, I just wrote these down. I'm not going to say this is exactly right, but you get the idea. It's a complex system that works, and it's evolved over millions of years. And if you can get it to work, you will have healthy crops. They need less inputs. Everything works brilliantly. Right. This is 2 years ago. We did a variety trial, no-till variety trial for KWS. They wanted to see how their varieties performed under a no-till system. Drilled all these strips of varieties, and then I had a trainee agronomist came and did a basis thing on mycorrhizae colonisation of wheat. So she took root samples in March and then again in July. And so the blue's the March figures, and I mean it's quite interesting that Silverstone was much higher, but there's varying amounts of mycorrhizae coming out of the winter. But then in July, we suddenly got all these results. Look, up to 83% colonisation of wheat. Until they'd done these tests, they thought 30 was quite good. So that's what I was saying, cereals are actually higher up the scale, and people have realised. Because in the past, cereals have always been grown in a conventional cultivating system, they've just never found the mycorrhizae on the roots. Now, give it a chance, and it's all there. All the varieties, I mean, there's a little variation, but any wheat variety will colonise with mycorrhizae. You don't have to worry. We had this fear that it was being bred out of them, the ability to associate with mycorrhizae. But it's not true. They're all good at it. This is the next year, this 18 harvest. We did the same thing again, only did one test. This was in June. There again, it's all high levels. This was a month earlier, so I dare say if we'd left it a month, those levels would have gone up. But it also shows that it's no good just getting a few plants out of one field and testing. It might be down here if you're at the wrong time of year. It's just something that grows over the growing season. Wrong way. Right, so I thought, I've got all this soil life working well, masses of mycorrhizae on my wheat. I'm going to see what it'll produce. This is the field after the first trial. So I knew I was going to went to a second wheat. I knew it was all going to be highly mycorrhizal. So I said I've drilled undressed seed, put one herbicide on it, nothing else. No growth eggs, no fungicides, no other nutrients, anything, just to see what the soil will produce. Like we said, a healthy soil is defined by what it will grow. So on top of that, this central tram line had nothing on it, no artificial nitrogen at all. Plantworks asked me to trial their PGP, whatever it is, nitrogen fixing bacteria on that tram line. And then Billericay Farm Services asked me to have a go with their foliar polyene nitrogen, which you can put loads on, it doesn't scorch. It's a foliar nitrogen. All right, good place to try it and see what it does. The first thing is I put 50 kilograms of nitrogen in 3 hits with that, and it certainly made the plants look green. You can see that the rest of the field was done on my conventional system. Obviously, the wheat looks a lot better. Couldn't see any difference with this. They look quite pale and yellow, but that did look a lot better with that on there. When we came to the yields, you would think that the darker green foliar nitrogen would yield a lot more, but actually to me that was quite disappointing. It's not a lot more than when it had no nitrogen at all. And it sort of shows that green leaves and greenness is not a guide to the yield you're going to get. That was just nitrogen in the plant, unbalanced, not really doing much good for it at all. So this is the one with the nitrogen fixing bacteria. I had 2 applications, one in the autumn, one in the spring, in the rain or just before the rain, washed in. It produced obviously a yield benefit over nothing at all, and it's about a tonne behind my conventional 180 kilograms of nitrogen. So getting something out of that, but you know, you can still grow a crop with nothing really when the soil's healthy. If I then added up the costs and the margins over where we were, it's £40 a hectare that the bacteria actually is on a par with putting fungicides and nitrogen. You know, there was a ton of difference. So this year that's £170 a hectare difference in output, but just the cheaper bacteria has got us up to this. We're 100 and obviously not a bigger margin, we're spending nothing. And this, because of all this nitrogen I put on, well, that was useless really. But I don't think this is far off financially, and that was the first go at it. If we keep on with this system, let it evolve over several years in the same field, let it build up like it did in the grass field, you know, there's potential to get there with very little inputs at all, make the same money, no pollution, no water pollution, no air thing. It's, you know, I'm going to do it tomorrow. I'm going to do whole fields with this and just see where I can get to. Right, that's all I need to say on that. My wheat blend. Did I say how long? A few years ago, I just mixed up these feed varieties of wheat. They're hard feed wheats. Well, that's a group 2 wheat, but it will produce the same thing. We looked at the parentage of these varieties, and they're not related in any shape or form. They've all come from completely different lines, and you'd be surprised how difficult that is, because nearly everything has got Robicus in its parentage. But anyway, they're all different. I bought half a tonne of each one, mixed it all up, drilled it. Saved the seed. About 3 or 4 times I've done that, and the idea was just to help with disease prevention really. And you know, I can't say how much that's worked, but I think within the whole system of the soil, that's the best way to go for that. But I don't really know whether I'm missing out on yields from newer varieties and pure high yielding varieties. No idea. 2 years ago I thought I'll see if they've interbred and there's been crossing, or whether it's all got mixed up, or whether the proportions have changed. So I sent a sample off. This is just to do a visual assessment of the seeds. They reckon they can say what variety a grain is by looking under a microscope. And they came back 15, didn't really know what they were. 33 they said they think were Myriad or Croft, which were never in the thing, so I presume they got that wrong as well. Just 8 Diego left. So I thought, well, they must have all interbred and mixed, and the whole lot's muddled up now. So that's good. It's working. That's diversity, really good. And I thought, well, I'm not going to pay royalty on these anymore, because I'm not growing them anymore. So anyway, I got an email in sort of November. Have you given up growing wheat? This is from the royalty people. You don't seem to have paid any royalty on any of your wheat this year. So I said, I went back and I was absolutely honest. I said, look, this is what I'm doing. Sent them this test. I said, who am I supposed to pay for this? What varieties do I pay it on? And it went on for quite a while, but they said, no, that's not right. They won't interbreed. You've got to pay the royalty. And I showed them this. In the end, they said, right, we'll want a sample. We're going to do a DNA test on your wheat. So that'd be interesting, wouldn't it, to find out what's going on? Right, this is the result that came back. It's, the idea is they get known varieties, do a DNA test, and then match it to 31 grains, 24 grains. And if there's a match, and it's something like more than the number is 0.09 something, they assume that that grain is that variety. And unfortunately, they've come back and said none of them are interbred at all. They're all still pure. And I thought, no, I wonder if they're having me on here, because they wouldn't want to set a precedent for this, because all you guys and everyone in the country are just going to, 2 varieties, save it, no more royalties to pay. And I was a bit suspicious, but I've asked a few people, seed breeders, and they've said that actually these wheat varieties are very tightly, I don't know how it works, but they don't cross-pollinate at all. They're self-pollinating, and it probably is actually true. So why the other visual thing didn't work, I don't know. I went back to them and they haven't explained it. So I'm afraid that I had to pay the royalty on these. We're stuck with that for the moment. The only interesting thing is that the proportions of the varieties have changed, which was useful for them to find out. I started off with 25% of each of these 4. This Conqueror is now up to 39, and all the other trials, variety trials I've ever done, Conqueror has come out at the highest yielding. No matter what I put it against, in my farm, in my system, that is a lot higher yielding, and it's gradually asserting itself in that mixture. The Gator doesn't seem to be much good, and that's just gradually going down. So the conclusion is that they are self-pollinating, these varieties. I've got to accept that. But it also means that if you're home saving seed, once you've got a variety, that will stay pure. You don't need to buy new C2 seed every year to save from. You know, people seem to think you've got to keep renewing your stock and keep it pure, but actually it won't change if you've got fields of it. It doesn't change if you put them side by side like this. They don't interbreed. And seed crops all have to have these isolation distances. Well, not necessary really, but unfortunately it hasn't worked out how I wanted, but it's quite interesting. Right, so this is the variety trial where we did the mycorrhizae testing 2 years ago. So all these varieties, I put my mixture in, a great opportunity to compare it to these new varieties. 4 tram lines, this last one was split in half. So I started off with a T0 on these 2, and then 3 had the T1, 4 tram lines, or 3.5 tram lines had a T2. This little bit on the end here had no fungicide at all. So that's my mixture. It was December, beginning of December that was drilled, first week after Lucerne. I always carry a refractometer around with me, and I just love just testing the plant sap for the sugar percentages. It's really interesting, you know, comparing different areas of fields and things, and I straight away noticed that I was getting higher readings over here than here. So I went back and did it methodically, tested every variety all the way up there and all the way up that tram line, and it's quite obvious that where there was no fungicide, this is the average of the whole lot, that's a higher Brix reading there than over there. And then I did some more outside the trial area just to make sure it wasn't a yield effect or a field effect, that it was coming across. Straight away we were into the conventional 2 fungicide program here and over there, the levels are back down. So to me that's good enough proof that the fungicides are restricting or upsetting the photosynthesis of the plants, and there's less sugar in there in the plants. It doesn't matter why or what's going on, but you've got to always consider that there's a downside to whatever you do. People never talk about the side effects of a fungicide. It's just, oh, it's going to do this amazing, kill the disease, greening, everything else. You don't hear about this. And the other thing to consider is that the higher your Brix number, the higher the sugar, the less susceptible it is to disease. So these fungicides may kill the disease that's there, but they're actually disadvantaging the plant for within a few weeks afterwards. And it's the same with all sorts of things we use. It's never mentioned what else it could be doing. So this is the results from the trial. I've juggled it around so that the highest yielding is at the top. KWS didn't want me to publish the results of this because they're a bit embarrassed that my old blend actually comes out on the top. So I've not put them in whatever. So we got 7.7 on that. The protein was pretty good. There's 2 or 3 a little bit higher, and they're milling varieties, I can tell you, those higher ones. And the Hagberg was actually higher than the whole lot. So it's a no-brainer really. I drill the whole farm with this every year and just keep saving it. I did the same again the next year. It's quite a nice photo of the trial. All the different varieties, 4 tram lines, and different fungicide treatments. So this is how we laid it out. Varieties, 4 tram lines. My agronomist says, right, I'm going to show you what we can do. I'm going to put the whole lot on here. 4 fungicides, 2 growth regulators, going to put loads of foliar nutrients on, really push it on, get it right. Right next to it, no fungicides, no growth regs. This is not conventional levels of nitrogen. And then this is what I do for the rest of my farm, just do 2 fungicides, no growth regs. And then this one was the same as the control, but I just, anything I fancied I chucked on there. I was playing around with different things. They sent a plot combine because they thought it was going to be interesting, and took a little nibble out of every plot. 48 different samples and took them all. Unfortunately, somewhere they've messed it up, and the results have come back all over the place. And I've been back to them, getting the data off the combine. I can't make any sense of it at all, and for some reason, I don't know. But what I did manage to do was, after they'd gone, cut this with my combine up and down the tram lines to get my own results that way. These are the yields of those tram lines. So the control just over 7. The standard that what I do on the rest of the farm has come out the top, which is nice to see. But this high input thingy has actually reduced the yield from that. Whether it's the growth regulators that have shortened the rooting and then we had a dry year, or the actual physical effect of the fungicides and everything going on has affected the plants, I don't know, but not a great result for the agronomist. it.
I'll stop you there, if that's possible.
Yeah,
Yeah, if you...
yeah. Oh, there's plenty more, whatever.
No, I'm sure we'll listen to you.
I'm going on too much. Okay.
For the rest of the afternoon. But
Okay, sure.
We're going to have a lunch.
Yep.
It's a great insight into what we're doing. I'm sure you'll have lots of questions later on. So
Okay, fine.
Thank